And finally, I'm happy to welcome to the stage Susan Parson. We're talking about the Airmen Certification Standard and an update, and I can think of no one more qualified to talk about ACS than Susan. I mean, you've been involved in it from the very beginning. So I'm going to let you take it from there. Thank you, and welcome to the stage.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's great to be here. I hope everybody else has had as much fun as Oshkosh as I have over the last few days. I actually got a few minutes to look at the air show a second ago. So it's all great, and you guys are the hardy ones because you're in here instead of out there watching the show. So the Airmen Certification Standards, here's what we're going to go through today. A little bit of a recap of why, what, and who. I always find that that's useful to do, and we're talking about what's new in 2017, so that's the fairly recent stuff. We're going to go through, for the benefit of the applicants, instructors, and evaluators, for everybody who might have a reason to use it, how do you use it, what's next, and then resources. And I want you to have your camera phones handy at the very end, because when I do that last slide, the resources slide, I'd really love for you to take a picture of it. It's got a lot of useful links that you can use going forward. So here we go. The ACS started in 2011 as a way to fix testing. There was a big hubbub, really an explosion in the industry about how some changes to the fundamentals of instructing had negatively affected the testing. So a bunch of people got together in Oklahoma and they had a discussion about it, but then back in May of 2011, one of my colleagues in Oklahoma City and I were together in a conference, and he said, you know, we need to get a group of stakeholders together to figure out what to do about airman testing. Now, I have had a problem with airman testing since the first test I took. And so he gave me I always told him he put a loaded gun in my hand, and I went forward to use it because he had the charter for this working group in his mailbox by the time he got back home to Oklahoma. So we started off with the idea that we were going to do a KTS, a knowledge testing standard. And I had in my head when we went into it, you know how the PTS looks, the little booklets, that we were going to do a KTS booklet so everybody would have a PTS and a KTS and life would be good. Well, this is where our industry partners have been a huge influence on everything since the very beginning. So as soon as we said KTS, one of our industry colleagues said, why would you do anything that stupid? Well, why is it stupid? Well, because it would give everybody something else to keep up with, and oh, by the way, FAA, it would give you some other way to diverge, and we really don't need to do that. Why don't you just put it all together? So that was where we realized that we really did need to provide clear standards. We needed to do all of the things that are here, and that's what led to the birth of the ACS. Taking the practical test standards and adding knowledge and then doing something about the attitudes, is what we call it, risk management, aeronautical decision making, everything else. I grew up in a family of teachers, swore I was never going to be one, got into flight instruction, look what happened to me. But I was familiar with instructional system design, which is knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and we ended up calling this knowledge, skills, and risk management. So if you look at the skills section on the bottom, the do, that is PTS-based flight proficiency. With a few exceptions, we haven't really changed anything there. We've just moved the skills into this consolidated framework. The second one, I'm moving from the bottom up, aeronautical decision making and risk and special emphasis. If you have looked at the PTS, you know that in the front, in the introduction that nobody ever reads, there is a lot of expectation for aeronautical decision making and good judgment, and that's about all it says. And then when you look at that long list of special emphasis items that evaluators are required to cover, it's not connected to anything. It's just list, 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 list. So what we did was we tried to define the behaviors that show good aeronautical decision making and risk management, and we incorporated the special emphasis items into the context of a specific area of operation and task. And then the part up at the top, the know. So that's the aeronautical knowledge. So what we tried to define for each area of operation and task in the PTS, we defined what is the knowledge that goes along with it. So it's all together in the knowledge, in the risk management skills. Everything is in the context, the right context. Another thing that happened, and this is another thing that our industry partners came up with, was the coding system. Everybody familiar with the learning statement codes, which appear as PLT codes? Anybody find them useful? Somewhat. But what the problem with the learning statement codes, or the PLT codes as they appear on the private pilot, those are anchored in references, and they are very subjective, and the experience that a lot of people have is you look up, if you look up the code like you're supposed to, then trying to figure out which reference and which topic it was is sort of complicated because, again, it's not in a specific place. Well, one of our industry partners said we need to do something about coding. And I confess, at the time I yawned. I thought this was kind of dull. I didn't really think that it was that important, and I said, okay, go for it, see what you can come up with. And she did. She came up with this coding system whereby each element, each task element is in the ACS, in each area of operation and task, has a unique code attached to it. And I'm going to tell you why that's important in a second. But the coding is pretty simple, and this is, well, first of all, it's anchored in the standard and not in references, and that's important. So here's what it means. The first characters have to do with which ACS it is, then the area of operation, then the task, and then the task element. So here's how it all fits together. The ACS is the single source set of standards for both the practical test and the knowledge test. So if you look at that, the ACS integrates and connects the certification standards for knowledge, risk management, and skill, which is what I just talked about. The coding is the thread or the glue. The codes allow us to connect the standards to the guidance to the test questions. So this way, what we've been doing in every active form test question for one of the tests that we have an ACS for right now, every active form test question has been coded, even if you can't see it yet, it's been coded to the ACS, which means that as we have been painfully making our way through the knowledge test question bank, if a question comes up that we cannot connect to one of the codes in the standard that the industry has helped us define and that we don't have guidance for, and the industry has helped us with the guidance pieces, then why are we asking this question? So we've ended up getting rid of a lot of things, and we've communicated that to you through the web page, the What's New in Airman Testing. We've gotten rid of things because we thought they weren't useful anymore. We've certainly managed to eliminate a lot of things because there's nothing in the standard to connect it to. I'm going to give you my favorite bad example, and I've got, there's a competition for the worst question, but my favorite example of the worst question, the silliest question out there was, what is the height of blowing sand? Okay. And the height of blowing sand, there were three possible answers. One was like 100 feet, the other was 150 feet, and the other is 200 feet. And this question offended me on many levels. First, it didn't belong there. It wasn't connected to anything. Second, if you've ever been to Arizona, dust out there, we're growing pretty big. So it wasn't even correct. But obviously, we eliminated this question because it's not connected to something that was in the standard that specifically people would need to know or consider or do. Now, here's another important piece about the way that the whole system fits together, which is things change in aviation. Anybody give me an example of something that's changed pretty recently? Basic med, I heard that. All right, so you think that in certification we need to start asking some questions about that. Well, in the old system, what we would have done is we would have had a small group of people who would sit there and they would make up some basic med questions and put them on the test, and that would be that. Well, now the system we have, when there are changes, we have a structure in which we don't start with the test questions. The test questions are the visible tip of the iceberg, but they're in the middle. We start by looking at the standard, and we look at, do we have something in the standard that would cover this? Well, yes, we do, and so we go to look to see where it is. And in the standard itself, the coverage is probably pretty broad, but we would need to look at the references, and you saw at the top there that references are listed, to make sure that the references that connect to basic med are there. So now we can point you to something that makes sense. Now we know that we've got the standards and we've got guidance that works. Now we can talk about test questions. But we don't just go out and develop 60 test questions. We have a blueprint for every test, and so we have a percentage, X, 4% of questions on this, 6% on that, whatever it happens to be. So we look at this, how many questions do we realistically need, and then we develop or revise questions that are appropriate for that. Now here is another really, really important part. Look at that public data part. That is important because, and this is something we haven't been very good at in the past, but we're working on it. We're getting better. We owe it to you to tell you when we've taken something off the test. We owe it to you to tell you when we have put a topic or subject on the test. Because if you're studying to take one, if you're teaching, if you're evaluating, if we don't tell you what you need to study, then how can you know? Or if we don't tell you that we've taken something off the test, then you're going to be spending time studying something that we don't think is important enough for you to know. So we have, and I'm going to give you that's on that resources page I told you about at the end. We have a page now. We update it at least quarterly. There's a huge amount of information, general questions and answers. There they go. Questions and answers. We have a whole section, and you can sort of see it on the slide. It says what's new in airman testing, and that is where we list what kind of subjects we have taken off the test, so that you know that you don't need to spend any time with them. Now the other part that we're trying to connect in a way that we've never really effectively done before is other certificates and ratings. So if we change something on the private pilot certificate, we need to look at how that affects commercial, maybe instrument, ATP, instructor, all of the other ACSs. And when I talked about that coding system, the coding is hugely important because that is part of what allows us to make and connect the whole system. So every time now, I mean, we've had a habit of, we get a recommendation that says, you should ask more test questions about. And I'll be honest with you, we're still having to fight the impulse that we have to just go do some test questions. And one of the reasons that I made the last two slides was because, I always tell people my role in this project, I'm the chief border collie. My job is to herd everybody in the government and industry who has something to do with it, but also to make sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to be doing. So when I found that there were people who were going off and writing test questions about the subject, no, that's not where we start. So I made the last slide in this one, and I sent them home with everybody with wallpaper your cube with these pictures. Tattoo them on your foreheads, do whatever you have to do. But make sure that we understand how everything works. Are we perfect at it yet? No. But are we getting there? Yes, because we actually have a system and we have structures and we have processes. Now, this is a really important piece. I try to fly as much as I can, but there's no way that I can be out there as much as people who are in the real world. And so it is hugely important for the FAA to have the input of people in the industry. I've got a slide later I want you to look at because it will show you every organization and some individuals who've been involved in this project in some form since day one. This was not something that people in dark corners of the FAA who never fly dreamed up. This was something that was developed by industry with the FAA in collaboration with the FAA. We had public comment. We use the Federal Register process, which is the federal government's way of communicating things. 2 or 3 times we published drafts of these documents and said, hey, tell us what you think. And actually at that time the FAA published these things on behalf of the industry. And it was kind of funny because I think some of our industry colleagues at first, they expected that they were going to get orchids, and so the first bunch of rocks that got thrown, I was like, oh, and our comment was, well, welcome to our world. This is what happens. What they did was they sat down and looked through and really filtered through what's useful here. We're getting feedback. What do we do with it? So there was a lot of refinement long before anybody in the public saw it. And then the other thing we did, which was very different, new and different, we did prototyping. We used Orlando. We had 2 or 3 different prototype phases in Orlando, Florida. And we had an instrument rating ACS prototype in Seattle, which prides itself on being the IFR capital of the country. They can have that. We did prototyping to see how it was going to work with real people, instructors, evaluators, applicants. We did surveys. The federal government can't do a survey without something like a 3-year process, so some of our industry colleagues set up surveys. And by the way, they weren't just random surveys. These were academic members of our team who set up kind of research-based questions, and we took the data, we consolidated it, we looked at it. What was it was surprising to me because I was expecting all sorts of pushback, but what we actually got from our prototype was, this is great, why can't we have it right now? How soon can we use this? Please get it out there. We actually had one person whose comment was negative, but it was kind of funny. It was, well, I haven't really read it, but I don't like it. Okay, thanks. That's some of the things that we did. So in June of 2016, we published, what we did was we replaced the practical test standards for the private pilot airplane certificate and the instrument airplane rating with the corresponding ACS documents. By the time that we had done that, people were always asking me, so when is the knowledge test going to change? Well, what we had been doing in the background for months before June was using the codes in the draft ACS to go through all of the active knowledge test questions for private and instrument and make sure that they were aligned with the ACS. I'd be the first to tell you they are not perfect questions. They're not. But we can't just whack them all off and start all over again because, well, there are a lot of reasons we can't do that. But what we did do was anything that didn't belong there was gone. Anything that we, topics that we needed to put on, we made sure that we did that. We revised questions. We tried to put them in the format of not just a rote memorization, but something having to do with the scenario. Another thing we did, and by the way, what we didn't have before were 2 things. One is we didn't have collaboration within the FAA about test question development. So now we have a team that includes people from the General Aviation and Commercial Division, Flight Technologies, maintenance for the maintenance side, and also the Air Transportation Division, and they are collaborating with the folks in regulatory support. So now we have a team, and we didn't have that before. Second thing is we have a written test question review and development process, and it starts out with, is this useful? Is this operationally necessary or useful? And if you don't get past that, and height of blowing sand didn't even get that far, if it didn't get that far, if it doesn't go that far, it doesn't go anywhere else. But we look at things like, are the references correct? We look at, if there are supporting data in the charts, is that correct? Are they legible? And here's a huge one for me. We look to see how long it takes to calculate one of these problems, because I remember doing, not fondly either, I remind you, triple interpolations across 3 badly rendered charts to calculate a 2-knot difference in wind at an altitude that I could not possibly reach in a GA airplane. Why would we do that? Why would we do that? The other thing that we would do is we would have you calculate something and come up with airspeeds in 125.3. Can anybody fly 125.3? I can't. We would also come up with things that have you do lots of interpolations. I call them the trapeze charts, where you go up and over and over and over, and you spend a lot of time doing it, and then you get to a landing distance of something like 1,242 feet. Hello. I would suggest to you, and as I do to, when I have CAP evaluation, people come to me and they'll do these calculations. I say, okay, great, you can do math, that's great. However, now let's talk about how long does the runway have to be for it to be safe for you to use under these conditions. I mean, if I give you 1,500 feet, boy, you got a lot of extra space, right? So the irony is that by asking some of these precision academics questions that we did, that we were being grossly inaccurate in terms of real-world safety and operations. So my colleagues know that when I show up on these, and we do it 2 or 3 times a week, these test question review telecons, that I'm going to ask really annoying questions, like how long did it take you to calculate that? Why is there a 2 on the end of that? You know, why are we using numbers that don't seem to make sense? So we really are trying to get better. So in June 2017, we put out the first version of the ACS for commercial pilot airplane. And we made some updates to the private pilot airplane certificate and the instrument rating airplane ACS. And we made those updates based on the feedback we got not just from our industry partners on the working group, but also from the public. Because once it got out there, people were saying, hey, what about, did you mean? So we made corrections and changes. We streamlined the presentation by consolidating certain task elements. And another thing that we started really trying to do was standardize both the phrasing and the sequence of task elements. So we're trying to create a clean look and feel across the documents. We're probably not completely there yet, but I think these documents are a significant improvement over the first ones. And we made modifications to the slow flight and stalls, the whole area of operation in private, which everybody had seen, and the commercial, which they hadn't. And then those documents were published to the Airman testing page that you'll see the reference for with the effective date of June 12th. The reason it's June 12th is that's a Monday, and that's the date that coincides with one of our test question updates. By the way, you're certainly welcome to take pictures of this, but there's also a version of this online and the page I'm going to give you. So I want to talk a little bit about slow flight because that was a bit of a controversy last year. You're nodding, you know. Yeah, it was. So when I learned to fly, and when most of us learned to fly, we learned slow flight as what I'm going to call minimum controllable airspeed. And so what that required you to do was fly around with the stall horn doing what? Beep. I hated that, but that's not why we changed it. So what we did last June was we changed it to say it's up there, and I know it's hard to read, but the part that caused the most angst for everybody is the establish and maintain an airspeed approximately 5 to 10 knots above the 1G stall speed. It was meant to be a guideline. We had a lot of feedback, a lot of controversy. So we ended up having some very frank, candid, spirited, pick your word, discussions with our industry partners and with others in the public about what is it we're trying to do, what is it we're looking to achieve, and what is it that we all think that we need to do for both testing and training. So in the course of all of that, one of our members came up with, I mean, there are a lot of things our industry partners came up with. This is to give you a sense of just how important that part is. So one of them came up with, so what we're looking to do is to kind of have everybody understand that slow flight, as we now have it in the ACS, is part of a normal flight operation. You fly slowly when you are where? In the traffic pattern, for example. So slow flight is a normal operation, and I don't know about you, but I don't want students flying around the traffic pattern going beep. And what we were concerned about, among other things, is that by teaching people who are primary flight students that it's okay to disregard the stall warning and to disregard it for an extended period of time, that they get, as one of our other industry people said, habituated to the idea that, oh, that's okay, I can ignore the warning. So, and I've certainly had that experience myself. I remember flying specifically with a gentleman, I think this was in the CAP, and we were on short final, and he had not managed the airspeed quite right, and so the stall horn was sounding, and I waited a short period of time for him to figure that out and do something about it, but he didn't hear it. I mean, he was used to ignoring it. So now, what we think of as abnormal flight operations, this is where the concept that we all learned of minimum controllable airspeed if you are flying at a speed where a stall warning, whether it's a horn or something else, is activated, that's abnormal. And you should be recognizing that, hey, I don't need to go any further. I need to do something about this. And then emergency flight operations, this would be if you have an unintentional, not briefed, stall, that's an emergency. You need to do something about it. Although this particular normal, abnormal, and emergency is not, it's not explained quite that way in the Airplane Flying Handbook. The Airplane Flying Book, Chapter 4, which took us 18 months of work within the FAA and between the FAA and industry to get it to a point that everybody agreed was where we needed that information to be. That's a lot of that whole framework and that understanding is explained. So that's where we came from. So this was 2016. 2017 we did several things first of all, to the entire area of operation, not just the slow flight task. So in the slow flight task, we took the knowledge elements and consolidated them into one element. So since we require that you use one knowledge element and one risk management element, we wanted to make sure that everything was covered. So now everything is covered in that one kilo, one element. The second thing was to change the phrasing of the skill elements. So now it says, establish and maintain an airspeed at which any further increase in angle of attack, whoa, was that good timing or what? Angle of attack, increase in load factor, or reduction in power would result in a stall warning. So we tried to, and by the way, this was not something that we just said, okay, here it is. This was extensively discussed, debated, back and forth with our industry partners. A lot of people looked at it before it went out. So in the stall section, we also added something. Now here's where the minimum controllable airspeed part comes. The element that is outlined there, Sierra 7 in red, this is because you can't do a full stall without going through minimum controllable airspeed, but now we're requiring the applicant to acknowledge the impending stall. So this is to try to build awareness. Remember the normal, abnormal, and emergency. So this is to try to make sure that people are learning what they're supposed to learn. In the commercial pilot ACS, the commercial pilot syllabus, PTS, required only impending stalls, but we made some very similar changes in that before we put it out. So I'm not going to try to read these to you, but I'm just pointing out that these are some of the things that we did with the slow flight and stalls area of operation in both the private and the commercial. And remember what I said earlier, we're trying to make sure that things are consistent across certificates and ratings. So we spent a lot of time looking at the tasks in each one and making sure that where it's appropriate, they match up. Now obviously the commercial metrics are a little different, the tolerances are different, but we wanted to make sure that everything else that we're building in was the same. Okay, how do I use it? We obviously still, people have asked, do you still want scenario-based training? Yes. And I've been told by some examiners, evaluators, that they find the ACS easier to use in terms of building scenarios, particularly because we've also published some material on the web page to help them do that. Now this is important too, that the ACS is not intended to make either portion of the practical test, either the oral or the flight portion, any longer than it was with the PTS. Now sometimes I've heard that, here's the reason. Yes, the ACS looks a lot longer, but remember what I said earlier, it's the single source set of standards for both the knowledge test and the practical test. So that's why we require only one knowledge element, a minimum of one knowledge and one risk management, and then all the applicable skill elements. So we have communicated that to evaluators, to inspectors, to pretty much anybody. We've communicated that multiple times. Now I've heard things here and there. There was one that we do try to track this down, by the way. So in social media there was something about an 8-hour check ride. So we start tracing down through it, and it turned out that that particular one started with somebody saying it could become an 8-hour check ride. and that had been translated to it was. So, and I heard something else last night about somebody who thinks they had a long check ride, and my comment on that is, please give us specifics. You're going to have an email address at the end, and if you can give us specifics about who, what, when, where, how long, we're going to track it down and try to find out what happened. But when it's just, oh, somebody told me that somebody else had an 8-hour check ride, there's not much that I can do about that. So, let's talk about how to use it. The PTS had a lot of introductory material in it, and it's kind of like most directions. A lot of people never read that. But that was where all the special emphasis items were. That's where all those references to aeronautical decision making, blah, blah. And then there was a lot of stuff in the PTS that was covered in notes with the tasks. Anybody looked at the practical test standards, change 7, PTS change 7 for the ATP? Some of the notes in that one, we haven't gotten to the ATP yet, but some of the notes in that one are like half the page. So what we did was we took the notes in the PTS for all of these documents that we're working on. We took the notes as well as other material about how to take this test, and we consolidated it. So now we have specific appendices, and the ones that I think are most important, or that I'm really particularly happy with, we have one called Safety of Flight. So we've consolidated all the material about how to conduct a check ride, a practical test safely into one place. And then we have another that's called operational requirements and equipment. So we try to talk about in one place, not just in a series of disjointed task notes, what needs to be what. And the story with that is I spent probably 2 weeks one time taking apart all the notes on the task. I was cross-eyed by the time I was done. But putting them all together and seeing that this is not consistent with that. And so by putting them in one place, it allows us to make sure that you're getting a coherent presentation and that we're not telling you one thing in one place and one thing in another. So we're trying to avoid notes as much as we can. The ACS format works. You've got the area of operation, the task, and the task elements, and then you've got the references up there. We have tried really hard, and this is not just the FA team, but the industry team, to make sure that the references section there is that you will find something about every one of those task elements in the references that are listed, because we have to be able to give you an FA reference to where it is. So that's what we've done. If you find a place where you say, hey, this task element is in here, but I don't see where it is in any of these references, let us know. We'll go track that down. A task applies to all classes unless the task title includes a limitation, and then it includes all areas of operation and tasks that apply to the category and class. So if it's something that's a multi-engine task, it's going to be shown that way. So we obviously wouldn't expect that to be covered. Now, the evaluator, DPE's plan of action, at least one knowledge, at least one risk management, all the skill elements, all the subjects missed on the knowledge test. And the bit on the end is important. So there's a minimum of 1, but the evaluator has discretion to ask more if that becomes necessary to make sure that the applicant knows what he's doing, or she. I always tried with my test to blow away the first few questions they would ask me so that they'd get bored and not ask me anymore. Okay, you got it, clearly. But you know, if you're an evaluator and you ask a question and you get an incorrect answer, or you get a shaky answer, you're probably going to want to dig a little bit more to see what's going on. And the ACS, just like the PTS, does not prohibit or stop an evaluator from doing that. If there are sub-elements, unless we have somehow indicated otherwise, then the evaluator may select an appropriate sub-element to test. Now, the fact that you're selecting one, that the evaluator is selecting one to test, if you're an instructor or an applicant, you think it might be a good idea to learn all of them in case, you know, because you don't know what you're going to be asked. So that's the theory there. Now, I want to talk about coding again for a second. This is just a review of the slide that I saw earlier, or showed earlier. This is the current state. And you notice that the learning statement codes are there on the bottom, just like they always have been. This is the future state. Now, why is the future state not now? Well, the FA has a very painfully outdated system, for managing tests. And it cannot currently accommodate a lot. It certainly can't accommodate the ACS codes yet. Now, we have used the ACS codes to make sure all the questions do match up to the ACS, so you can be confident about that. What we haven't been able to do yet is print the exact code for what you missed on the knowledge test. We have told DPEs to please include the specific skill elements or risk management elements that somebody missed in the remarks section in IACRA. Now, where this is I don't know if you're familiar with government contracting. It does take a while. One of the things that we have to do in government contracting is we have to be able to specify exactly what we want. But if we have not done this before, we found out the first time we tried to do it that we didn't really know what we wanted. So we thought we were asking for what we wanted and needed, but we got such a wide variety of responses back from the potential vendors that nobody knew what to do with it. So we learned from that and went back and started again. So we're still working on that, and the world will be better when we can get there. Now, there's a lot of discussion I hear about, well, why can't you just give us a cross-reference between the learning statement codes and the ACS codes? Well, there are a lot of reasons for that. We did look at it. We did, and some of our industry partners actually made an attempt to do that early. But it's not possible to do it in any kind of meaningful or efficient way, in part because, remember that learning statement codes are referenced to, or they're anchored in references, not standards. So, so they're kind of all over the place, and they've gotten to be highly subjective. In some ways there are too many of them, in some ways there are not enough of them. So there's just no way to match them up in a way that is reliable and consistent. So what we do propose is that you use the learning statement reference guide. So if you're an applicant or an instructor or evaluator, you take the applicant's knowledge test report and PLT whatever it is. In this case, I gave you PLT 003, calculate weight and balance. You can do a word search through the ACS, and everywhere that those concepts appear, that can be the selection of if you're a DPE, that can be what you select as your required element. The interesting thing, and then you can use the results to retrain or retest in the context of a specific task, not just not just a rote memory sort of thing. And some of the DPEs who've used this have told me that, yeah, they think that that's an effective way to go about it. The interesting thing to me, too, is that if you're doing this throughout the ACS and not just targeting one specific code, you're probably going to be much more confident that the applicant knows what went wrong and how to fix it than if you're just looking at one element. But we will get to the point where we can print the task element there. So what's next? We are in the process of developing an ACS for the Airline Transport Pilot Certificate airplane. That one is very complex because it needs to be different things. It needs to be for the ATP certification, but it also needs to be for the type rating. There are a lot of notes in it. There are a lot of barnacles on it. Our team has spent a lot of time trying to take it apart and look at all of the elements, put the appendix structure together, but also trying to make the task sequence and the task sequence, wherever appropriate, line up with the other ACSs, because we don't want anything to be really different unless there is a reason for it to be really different. So, so we're working on that one. We're working on the one for instructor airplane. Now, how many instructors in the room? Anybody? Okay. Do you find the fundamentals of instructing useful? No, I didn't think so. I didn't either. Well, when we first started looking at this one, we said that I remember calling up the industry person who heads the little subgroup. We work in a lot of subgroups who handles this, and I said, okay, I need you to make this practical, useful, and it needs to be meaningful. So they have been really struggling hard to find a way to make sure that all of this fits together. We've gone through lots of iterations, lots of drafts. We spent a lot of time on it this spring because one of the things that we want instructors to do is not just teach risk management to students, but also part of being an instructor applicant is learning how to manage the risk inherent in flight instruction. If you're an instructor, have you ever had a student try to kill you? Probably. So there is definitely risk involved in flight instruction, and so the instructor ACS is looking at whether an instructor can teach that to students, but also manage the risk that is inherent in being giving flight instruction. So what we're going to do with that is once we get a draft of it that everybody on the team is happy with, we're going to do what we call a tabletop prototype. We've got a couple of sites picked out that have high volume activity and initial instructor with both DPEs and aviation safety inspectors, and we're going to hand it to them and say, look, work on this. Tell us, can you work with this? Can you use this? And have them really give it a first scrub, and then we will eventually publish both of these to the Airman testing page that I'm going to show you the link to make sure that the public has an opportunity to comment and then tell us all the things that we missed and what is not understandable. The other thing we're working on, and I love this, God created aircraft mechanics so pilots could have heroes too. I don't know about you, but I really believe that because you love that, huh? Did you see the other one, Keep Calm and Love an Aircraft Mechanic? Yeah, okay. Well, we weren't planning to go beyond pilot certificates to start. We really weren't, because there's a lot of work that is going into what we're already doing. However, our colleagues in the airworthiness world, and you're grinning, I see you, is going, hey, wait a minute. Maintenance needs help. That we've got, if you think we have stupid things on the pilot side, just look at what we have on the airworthiness side. And so we went to, there's a lot of bureaucratic black magic that goes into doing these groups, but because for the government to be able to get stakeholder feedback and input on things like this, we have to use specific formats and processes, and it's a little painful, but that's part of what I do. I manage that particular piece of it. So we went through that process to get the permission to expand the group, to expand the scope of the group, but also to expand its membership. So we brought in representatives from different maintenance communities. 147, non-147 schools, we got somebody from GA, we got an airline person. So we got a wide variety of people together to help us put together the maintenance side. Now the interesting and actually encouraging thing, one of the many, is that because we had already we've been through the painful process of inventing what the ACS is and how to use it, now they could come in and take the templates and fill it out. So our maintenance team has been able to pull together a draft ACS much faster than I thought possible. And so they are getting ready to, they've already been using the coding to cull bad questions. They are already, the industry team has already been doing what they did on the ops side and giving us feedback and recommendations for improving handbooks. So all of those things are going on, but at a much faster pace, which leads to what do we do next? So at our last meeting, we invited as observers some folks from the helicopter community, because they were very anxious to have an ACS for rotorcraft. And what was fun about that is at the end of the 2-day meeting, one of them was sitting there and I said, so what do you think? He says, well, I had no idea how involved this was. I really thought that we could just come in and knock it out, but now I understand that it's a system. Now I understand that we're going to really have to put some time into this. And so we hope that they will be able to join us for doing more of that work by the end of this calendar year. So we are going to be moving on, but one of the reasons that we didn't just go out and expand it to everything is first of all, it took us a lot of time and work to invent this. And it seems, things that seem really obvious to you now weren't at the beginning. They certainly weren't to us. But I'll give you, this is an analogy that John King came up with, and I really liked it. I tell him all the time. I don't quote him very often, but I love this one. He's, you know, somebody in our group said, hey, you know, this, why didn't we always do it this way? And he says, well, because we had to think of it. He said, remember the time, some people do, when we all carried suitcases through the airport, and then somebody thought to put wheels on suitcases, and now we all have wheels on suitcases. He said, this is kind of the wheels on suitcases, but somebody had to think about it, think of it first. So we will move on, but the other reason that we didn't want to move too far and too fast is that we wanted to get some experience with at least foundational certificates and ratings and see if does this work, are we doing it right, what do we need to do, what do we need to change, before we start trying to spread it to other certificates and ratings. We didn't want there to be divergence. We want to be at a point where there's a family and you understand what the look and feel of the ACS is. So that's what we did. Now this is, I want you to take a second. If you take a picture of something, please get this one too. Anytime you see or hear that this was something that was just dreamt up in the dark corners of the FAA, and we do have some dark corners, I admit that, that these are the organizations and in some cases individuals who have been involved at some phase over the last 6 years that we've been working on it. It's a big group, and you will see that there are competitors in this group. But let me tell you, the competitors, when they come in, they put aside their competitive differences, because everybody who comes into our project, and we do, by the way, a huge amount of work we have 4 face-to-face meetings a year, and the rest of the time we meet telephonically. The groups, we divide into subgroups. The folks go off and do this work. It does not cost the FAA a penny, because all of these people, all of these organizations are contributing their resources voluntarily. And they are doing that because they, like we, care deeply about getting it right. And this is not, and you know, we all say this, but I'm gonna make sure that you hear it, that this is not just about passing the certification test. This is about being able, having a certification system that produces pilots and mechanics who can do more than pass the certification test. They can pass the real life test. We want people who get certified truly to be equipped we want them to be able to know, consider, and do everything that they need to be safe pilots once they leave the training environment, or safe mechanics, because we're building a lot of risk management into the mechanics side as well. So the other thing that I hear sometimes is, well, you're letting the industry develop the test questions. No, not at all. The industry team has been very deeply, closely involved in developing the standards, in reviewing the guidance and making recommendations on it. But what they have not been involved in is reviewing and revising questions, with one exception. And that one exception is both on the pilot side and on the maintenance side. We have invited what we call an industry stakeholder, somebody in both cases from the academic world who has expertise not only in the subject matter, but also in what I call the dark art of question development. And those individuals have signed non-disclosure agreements, and they participate with us in the test question review and revision process. And both of them, because they understand how to develop questions that really get to what you need to go to, they have given us a great deal of information and expertise that we're trying to build into the test question development. So it is absolutely not true that the test preparation providers are off developing questions that then they sell. That simply is not true. Now here's the slide you've been waiting for. This is the information that is available to you. So I really would love for you all to, first of all, go to the first link, the testing link, and up in the upper right hand corner of that web page is a link that will allow you to subscribe to the page. So when you have, anytime that we make changes to something, you will get an email that will tell you what's changed, and it usually includes links to take you directly to what has changed. The second link under Airman Testing webpage, we've created a specific page for the ACS. So all things ACS go, or you will find under that link. One of the things you will find is a very detailed set of frequently asked questions about the ACS. They are hyperlinked, so you can navigate within the document. They are divided into general questions, questions for applicants, for evaluators, and for instructors. When we revise everything quarterly, and when we make revisions, we've started putting in gray shading anything that is new in those frequently asked questions. Another thing we have here is there's a course on fasafety.gov. If you took the one that we put up last year, we are just about to, the person who needs to post the new one was on well-deserved vacation and is now in the process of finalizing the revision to the online course, so you can take a course for Wings credit. And then I'm going to skip the focus team for a second and go down to safety alert for operators, 17009. It's painful that I remember that last year we had SAFO 16010, which dealt with the slow flight installs issue. We replaced it this year with one that is broader and goes more deeply into the rationale and the thinking behind what the changes that we've made to the slow flight installs area. So that guidance in conjunction with what's in Airplane Flying Handbook Chapter 4 is all of the guidance material that goes with what we've done in the testing standard. The last one, which is actually the next to last bullet, third bullet, ACS focus team. One of the things that Flight Standards is doing now is using what my boss calls focus teams. So everybody cannot be an expert in everything. So this started with cargo and a couple of other issues. So there is a little group of experts around the FAA who are electronically connected in a focus team. And so all the focus teams, including us, we have a mailbox. And I can promise you that that mailbox is checked every weekday. And when I was doing it directly myself, I've handed that over to one of the staff. But I can tell you that when I checked it, I did it every single day, including weekends and holidays, except Christmas and the day I broke my wrist. I didn't check it that day. I was kind of busy. But the focus team is, if you have a question or a concern or an issue or a suggestion or whatever it is about the ACS, you can go VFR direct to this mailbox. You do not have to go through anybody. I had somebody say, well, my POI says I have to go through him. No, you don't. No, you don't. Just send us an email and you will get a response. You will get an acknowledgement on the same day. Yes, we have this. If we can't give you a same day answer, then we're going to tell you that we're going to get back to you. If you give us a suggestion, hey, we think we need to improve this, very likely, we're not going to just turn around unless it's a safety of flight issue and immediately revise the ACS, because we've had a bad habit in the past of getting up to something like change 17, and that's not fair. I mean, we shouldn't be changing things out from under you all the time. So what we're trying to do is provide stability by saying, okay, we're going to revise these documents once a year, and if something comes up that says, hey, we need to do something sooner, we will only be doing that in consultation with our industry partners, and we all agree that yes, we need to get this out now, and then we'll try to communicate that. But anyway, so if you send suggestions to the focus team for how to improve, we will take that into account and be considering that for the June 2018 changes. So this is, I had somebody ask me, I did a presentation for one of for NAFI a few minutes or a couple hours ago, and somebody said, well, what about the figures, the test figures? I said, send it to the focus team, because I can promise you somebody will receive it, read it, look at it. So there we have it, and please don't hesitate to use it. Please send us your feedback. And more than anything else, though, please understand that this is a wonderful example, I think, of the FAA and the industry working together for something that we all want, which we want to be able to, we want to use the certification process to produce pilots who are truly capable of going out into the system and flying safely and not hurting themselves or other people. So thank you for coming, and I hope you all have had a wonderful air venture so far, and I guess we've got a couple of days left, so enjoy.